My big question for you, Vardit, is what does it mean to be human?
Hmm. It's a really tough one. I think we all think that we intuitively know what it is. And when we're asked to unpack it, we discover that, as you know, it's one of the deepest philosophical questions there are. As an ethicist, being human to me means seeing the world through the lens of ethics. I think that humans are the animals that understand right and wrong, just and unjust, good and bad. And that when we look at our choices, at how we shape our relationships to others, us and the environment, we always ask ourselves intuitively, is this good or bad? Who is going to be harmed? Who is going to benefit? Are we being fair? So, to me, as an ethicist and doing so much of my work looking at science through an ethical perspective, being human is the ability to look at anything through the ethics glasses and ask the ethical questions about all of our choices in life.
That's fascinating. So, as a philosopher bioethicist, I find that the question itself is so fascinating and so rich. There's so many different ways to take the question, to take like what is someone after when they're asking that question? What does it mean to be human? It's almost like being dropped in the middle of the forest, right? And like some people will like try to run in one direction right away and like try to come up with something. I'm kind of more inclined to like sit there with the question for a while, kind of like sit there and kind of like run my hands through the soil. Like, where am I? What is this question getting at? What does it mean to be human? Is the question asking, what is a human being? Is the question asking, what is the meaning, the value of being a human being? It's for a philosopher like me, it's a really, really interesting question just to sit with. Like you're kind of sitting there in the forest, kind of wondering, where am I? Where is this possibly going? If we think that the question is asking, what does it mean to be a human being, as a living entity? I can't help but think, human beings have not been around for that long. One time, my son, when he was very little, he came into the room I was sitting in, and he said something just like random. He just said, he was very little. He said, if the history of the earth was tattooed on your arm, human beings would appear at the very tip of your fingernail 300,000 years ago. He just says that and he walks away. I thought, well, that's interesting. Yeah, human beings are a very recent phenomenon on Earth. So, what does it mean to be something that's like kind of that recent in Earth history? Yeah, sometimes I even think if an alien came to Earth and said, "Tell me, what is a human being?" What would you say? Like, how would you try to answer like that kind of framing of the question, right? From that perspective, someone who has no idea what human beings are, it's not like you and I asking each other, like, what is a human being? We kind of, like you said, we kind of like, how would you explain it to an alien intelligence to say there are these bipedal things running around everywhere? Like, what are these?
And there's billions
And
of
there's
them.
and there's more and more, and they're like all over the earth. Is that a reasonable question to be trying to answer? I'm wondering, what do you think about that?
I love that framing of the view from an alien perspective because we're, of course, embodied
Mhm.
and we can characterize ourselves as having a certain biology, which is a lot of what science does. But so much of what makes us us is in the things that we cannot quantify, measure, or even describe empirically: our mind, our consciousness, our relationships, our values, how we relate. And that might be difficult to explain to an alien unless they have similar framings to
Yeah,
ours.
yeah.
So when I think about being human, I think about how we use that concept, sometimes intuitively, when we make decisions about how to design
Mm.
society. So think about how in the US today, there's so much political turmoil around reproduction. Some of it is because we don't agree on when being human starts. Sometimes we call it life, sometimes we call it being a person, but it's really about being human because once we call something, somebody human, we think that we owe them a special type of respect,
Mhm.
a special consideration. So much of our political battles revolve around our disagreement on when we start to be human and also what it means to lose your humanity. Many of us will suffer from loss of cognition at the end of life, dementia, reduced physical capabilities. Are we less human at that point? We don't think so, but why not? So it's not
Right.
just a philosophical question. Again, as a bioethicist, for me,
Mhm.
yes, it's philosophically intriguing, and we could talk until tomorrow about the concept. But what do we do as a society with this concept? We decide when to start respecting certain biological entities, when maybe to stop respecting other biological entities. What kind of respect do we deserve throughout our lives because we're human? So, this is not just philosophically intriguing, it's hugely consequential.
Well, what you're just saying shows me that we're taking like really different starting points in analyzing this question. Because I think you're immediately going to kind of like bias toward action and kind of like society, which is I think a really wonderful direction to take. I think I'm still sitting in the spot that I landed in the forest, kind of like you're running. I'm kind of looking around, so like where am I with this question? Because I keep returning to sort of like the issue of like why should we think that human beings as a biological species that evolved over time, very late in kind of current Earth history, why should we think that that has value? Of course, many people will say it's our relationship with God, or they'll tie it to something kind of like out of the earth, out of the Earth sphere, some like relational thing with the cosmos. Um, but I think like strictly thinking from kind of like the pattern of facts of how we biologically came to be, why should they have value? I keep thinking about the fact that, well, when human beings first emerged in Africa 300,000 years ago, there were other human-like species, Neanderthals, we think maybe Denisovians, there were others that kind of shared so many of the same traits. They buried their dead. They had families. We don't really know how much language and art they had, but they had quite a bit of what we also consider to be human today. Would those, if they were still around now, would they still have the same kind of value that we place on human life? I kind of think it's really fascinating to me how sort of it's almost like by accident that we're sort of like the last one standing, like literally the last one standing. I'm wondering, like, are we a little bit too biased toward like giving ourselves value because we look around, we're like the only ones like this now. Yeah, there are the apes, but we're really quite unique in other respects. One of the things that I found fascinating is Svante Pääbo, who got the Nobel Prize for his work on the Neanderthal genome, once said, as he studied how human beings migrated out of Africa and into Europe and Asia as they were going north, and at the same time Neanderthals were living amongst them, what they found, what they think they found from records is that whenever Neanderthals approached a big body of water, like an ocean or something that they can cross, they stopped. They stopped there. Human beings crossed. Isn't that fascinating? Human beings didn't stop at the water's edge. They wanted to explore. Is being human about like having that kind of level of curiosity? What's on the other side? Exploring. Is that an element of it? It would suggest when you look at that comparison of how the migratory patterns or not for the Neanderthals existed out of Africa, it may seem like there's something kind of different about the human mind, maybe. Wondering your thoughts on that. Yeah, so I'm still sitting in the forest, kind of wondering where are we here and how did we get here? So maybe take a little step back, in light of those kinds of facts, what do you think?
So I'll join you in the forest
Uh,
because you invited me so nicely.
Sure.
But I'll bring with me a bunch of philosophers from sort of the history of ideas, the history of
Mm,
thought. Um, and many Western philosophers told us that what makes us special and we are different from the Neanderthals and the other animals that exist today is rationality, is language, the ability to conceptualize, the ability to communicate information through language, to tell stories that shape generations.
mhm,
Um, and I always believed that language has something to do,
mhm,
is a strong element of being human because it allows us to share our rationality.
right.
Other philosophers tell us that it's more embodied. It's the ability to feel pleasure and pain that is the basis of ethics. We consciously understand what pain feels like, so we understand our responsibility not to cause it. We know how much we're motivated by our pleasure, so we want to give it. But that's a very physical basis for ethics. So if I go back to rationality, if I'm sitting with you in the forest reflecting, we're at a turning point because for the first time in the history of either the planet or our species, we are seeing the emergence of a non-human intelligence. Yes, we designed it, we created it, but it's becoming independent of us. So if for years I was comfortably sitting in the forest thinking, I'm special, I deserve respect.
Look what I made. Oops.
Wait, so what happens to being human if we are not the only rational entities on Earth or in the universe? Uh, does that mean that I owe those chatbots, pretty soon robots, the same moral respect that I owe you? Or does it mean that we're just not as special as we thought we were? Or do we have to now find a new way of explaining what makes us, what makes us special? I'm very uncomfortable with all of that.
Yeah, I really like what you said about sort of, maybe the importance of language to rationality. There have been lots of concerns around what's called neurological chimera research, where you put human neural tissue, human neural cells into laboratory animal brains to study human mental disorders and brain disorders and whatnot. But the concern about those kinds of experiments is that maybe you might raise a human-like consciousness. So this is kind of like, I think, in parallel to the AI conversation, right? Human-like consciousness in the sentient being that has the ability to feel pleasure and pain, but now maybe has a gain of function or some other cognitive enhancement with the human self. My take on that issue and that worry is what we consider to be self-awareness or self-consciousness. If you study how children develop that, because they're not born with self-awareness, that develops a little bit later, a few years later. It usually is timed at the same time that language forms. And then, maybe being human or becoming more human for a baby is about being able to represent to yourself your own thoughts. Like you're not just experiencing things left and right, but you're thinking about what you're experiencing. You're thinking about yourself as a being that has experiences. And to do that, you have to be able to represent your beliefs to yourself. Like I am thinking about thinking. And to have that organized thinking, you have to have like a linguistic structure that kind of gives you that ability to even like wrap your head around or conceptualize the fact that you're thinking about something you're undergoing. And I think that normally comes along with language acquisition. So getting back to the chimeric animals, I don't think unless they can start speaking and having languages, they're not going to really develop the kind of self-consciousness that people attribute to young children as they're growing up. One other thing I want to say about language is, as you know, they've tried to train chimpanzees and other apes to use American Sign Language. And it's, they learned American Sign Language, and therefore, they also, according to my logic, maybe have a self-awareness because they can use language. What's fascinating about those studies is that those, as far as I know, and as far as the literature can tell, these apes that use sign language, they never ask questions. Or they don't talk to each other with sign language. Isn't that fascinating? They don't use it to communicate. They kind of use it with their trainer, but they always use it to say things like, I want this, or this is how I'm feeling. But they don't ask questions like, who am I? Who are you? Why are we doing this? They don't ask those like existential questions. So again, it's not just language, maybe it's not just rationality or being able to solve puzzles. It's something about like being able to think about yourself, right? And wonder about like, are you experiencing the same thing I'm experiencing? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Like that seems to me a really human-like trait.
Absolutely. My father always said humans are the only animals who care about their grandchildren. Now, I'm not sure if that's true biologically,
Mhm.
but it's an intriguing idea that we can conceptualize a future that goes beyond our own lifetime and even beyond our children, just like we can conceptualize a past and why that matters. Think about ancestry DNA testing. We all want to know where we came from. Why does it matter? Why do we think that biologically where we came from has any impact on our identity, our sense of culture? Because we're really grounded in an ability to think about the past, and what motivates us now is the ability to think about the future. And that's not just rationality, that's language and consciousness that is also imbued with emotion. We care where we came from, and we care whether our grandchildren and their grandchildren have a chance on this planet. So, yes, it all has to do with language and thinking, and exactly in the way that you said, thinking that goes way beyond what I need to survive. Can I trust you to protect me? It's so much broader in on the time scale, on the emotional scale, in our ability to. I loved how you said, think about thinking. Why does it even matter that I think? And Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. So
Right, right.
even at that level.
Yes, I kind of like this direction. We're kind of like we're walking together a little bit out of the starting our starting spot in the forest. We're kind of heading through some paths. I want to interrogate a little bit more this idea about rationality and being human, because that's kind of a go-to answer for a lot of, or almost all philosophers since the Enlightenment, where, of course, if you ask a philosopher, like, what does it mean to be human? They're going to like say what they value the most about themselves, like rational thinking, abstract thinking, or even ethics. They'll kind of, it's almost like answering that question kind of like tells us more about the person who's trying to answer it
Nice.
than objective reality about other people's experiences. That's why I love that question, because I want to hear into the museum programs, all the things we're doing for the year of being human. I want to hear what people have to say, because I'm going to learn something about them. I'm going to learn, like, what do they find important? Because I think it's kind of the way you answer that question is kind of like a projection of how you see yourself or what you think is important.
I love the framing of projection because, yeah, we care about things. In ethics, we say we have values. And of course, we see the world from that vantage point. So we project our values onto the most important question, which is, what does it mean to be human?
Right.
It's what does it mean to us?
Right.
And then we make that about humanity in general.
In bioethics, in neuroscience, in the areas that we're really interested in a scholarly sense, there's so much interesting sort of, I think people, I would even say it's like an anxiety about, like, their memories, and like making sure that they preserve that and they don't enter into dementia. You hear so many stories of people who wonder, if I get dementia, if I start to kind of lose my rationality or even my memories, am I still the same person? And there's a lot of like concern around that. People who take care of their aging parents will see them slip into dementia, and they'll kind of say, I'm very slowly losing the person that I love. So I think this connection, this idea, is very natural to think this way. Rationality, my mind, my brain. Yes, these are biological categories, but this is really kind of what I think is important, right? Yeah, people can like have heart transplants, they can have lung transplants and still think they're the same person. But if you can imagine a brain transplant, you would say, well, where did I go when the brain got transplanted? So I think that connection of like who I am, what is a person, what is human being, that's usually tied up to the brain. Um, I think rationality has so much weight in that way, in the way people think about bioethics, the way people think about end of life care when they have dementia. We see that a lot in our field. But I can't help wondering, though, if there's still too much overemphasis on the brain, too much overemphasis on rationality at the expense of other things that we should probably start caring a lot about, of what it means to be human and what it means to define your life. Um, I like to think that a lot of times people, like philosophers, they'll overemphasize the importance of rationality at the expense of other things. I did my philosophy dissertation on the concept of autonomy. This idea of what does it mean to be self-determining? What does it mean to be in charge of your own life and make your own decisions? And what I studied when I was a graduate student was really telling. It really showed me, like, the philosophers I was reading, like they were highly, highly valuing rationality. So they would say things like this. One very popular theory was, all animals, everything on earth has what are called first order desires. I desire to eat this. I desire to do that. I want to do something very particular. Human beings have second order desires. They have desires about their desires. I don't want to have that desire. I don't want to have that craving. Or I want to have more of a desire to do this.
I want to eat
Exercise.
cake, but I
Yeah,
don't want to want the cake.
exactly.
So how can I engineer
I want to
myself?
have certain kinds of desires and not other kinds of desires. That's a really interesting kind of like next level reflection. And they always said, it's when you're acting on your second order desires that you have autonomy. And I thought that's a little bit of an odd thing to think, because why not think that the real you comes out at the first order, and the second order is kind of more like the trained, overly socialized self. And I always kind of thought, well, why assume that when you keep going up the chain of desires, you become more like your true self? I kind of thought, well, you can also make the argument that as you go down, that's more who you are.
Yeah, and that touches on another concept that we link to being human, and that's authenticity.
Mhm.
We value humans who are more authentic, and we ask, hey, what does that mean? Um, I think we struggle still a lot with our place on this planet compared to other animals. So a lot of us ethicists think that, as I said, the human being deserves special type of respect. We cannot treat a human the way we would treat an animal. We experiment on animals in ways that we would never experiment on humans, or we shouldn't. But then there are philosophers like Peter Singer who say, no, no, this should be about pain and suffering and the ability to feel and the ability to be afraid. And we should treat certain animals like we treat humans. We are suffering from not racism, but speciesism.
Mhm.
We are valuing ourselves beyond other animals in a way that is ethically unacceptable. And in the future, when we evolve and we become more moral, we will look back at what we've been doing to animals and we'd be horrified. Just like we think about slavery today. We
Mhm.
thought that there are different types of humans, and now we think that animals don't deserve the respect. So I think we're struggling with what it means to be human in light of the fact that there are other biological creatures around us that can feel pain, fear, maybe hope. With some of them, we have close relationships.
Right.
um, so to me, the question of being human is also a lot about what makes us different, special,
Mhm.
more advanced. And the second order desires is one of those things. When my dog wants the bone,
Mhm.
he never stops to think, wait, do I really want the bone? Is that good
Right,
for
right.
me?
And
And that makes us special.
yeah, yeah, and I think, and people try to explain behaviors like, well, the dog is trained not to do that because it has another conflicting first order desire. I don't
Yeah.
want to get punished, or yeah, I want to stay on mom's good side. So that's fascinating. I want
I
to.
want to tell you how sophisticated he is. He will do the bad thing and then put himself in the crate because he knows the punishment is coming and he calculated that the crime is worth it. So I will find him already having punished himself. Is that first order or
Well,
second
well,
order?
well, well, so getting back to the alien question example, I don't know. That could be all first order. I mean, you can learn something by just observing
Of
behavior. You
course.
can observe, or you can introspect. Those to me are like the two big routes to knowledge: introspection and observation, and out kind of like data or behavior, looking at something. If an alien were to come to Earth and watch somebody walking a dog, I think they would think the dog is in charge. Because
Absolutely.
the owner's got to pick up after the dog. Like, who's going to do that if you're in charge, right? But let's go to the introspection route. Is being human something you have to sort of know by introspection and experience, or is it something you think you can answer by observing other people?
I would like to believe, I choose to believe that it's about introspection because if it's not, then ChatGPT already crossed the line.
Mm.
If I can have that level of conversation with artificial intelligence that just went through massive amounts of data and can generate a string of words that makes me feel like they're understanding me, being empathic,
Mhm.
they like me, I
Mhm.
care that they like
Right.
me. If it's not about introspection, artificial intelligence is human right now. And
Mhm.
again, I don't want to live in that world. That's my bias. So I don't think generative AI is capable of introspection. Others disagree with me, by
Mhm.
the way. They think that it even crossed that line already, or it's about to. But I think that the ability to look at ourselves from a second level and asks ourselves, why does this matter to us? Why are we even sitting in the forest,
Mhm.
pondering what it means to be human? That is particularly human, and that cannot be replicated by observation
Mhm.
and digesting data and statistically knowing what is the next move to make. artificially, we can look as if we're doing the ethical thing, but we will not have the self-reflection to know that we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. So for me, this distinction between being human because I observed and imitated versus being human as a fundamentally self-reflective exercise, that's fundamental. Otherwise, we already lost our special status and we're sharing our humanity with a bunch of endless amount of of artificial entities that can act like us.
Yeah. So I want to follow up with 2 points. So I think what you said is really fascinating. So one point is getting back to the idea of overemphasizing rationality. When you introspect, I don't think it's a purely rational activity. I think emotion, feeling, that's all part of introspection. You're reflecting on what you care about in a lot of cases. And what you care about is not strictly like a rational algorithm. It's the head and the heart working together. And I don't think right now computers have emotions the way I normally understand them. So that's really fascinating. So if being human relies on periodic introspection, um, it can't just be all rational introspection. It has to be a little bit more emotional. So that's point number one. But the other thing is that going back to autonomy, and you brought up authenticity about what does it mean to be an authentic person. There's a really interesting relationship between the ideas of autonomy and authenticity. I started with talking about how, like, when I think about being human, I kind of start with, like, how did we get here evolutionarily? I kind of start about kind of like how things come into existence. When I was doing my philosophical work on theories of autonomy, it's not like human beings suddenly spring up and they already have all their rational faculties, like just like they're already fully formed. You're a baby first, and then you're a child, and you're dependent, and you don't have language. You pick up language. You absorb the language that's around you wherever you happen to be. You like a sponge, you bring it in. So same thing with your cultural values and the things you care about. You kind of soak it in initially. So you get this starter set of values. Like, you didn't choose that. You kind of have, and then philosophers think, okay, the way that you become authentic is that at some point you have to critically reflect on all these values and say, do I keep it? Do I do, it's like having a basket of apples. You inspect each value and then you keep it or you toss it. I thought that's a bizarre way to think about authenticity, because who does that? Like, besides, again, maybe a few philosophers. But even if you were to do that, like, what are you actually doing? Like, how did you ever get your first apple clean if they're all dirty? Like that idea of, like, it's something you're doing for yourself to become authentic and therefore autonomous, like, presupposes that you're being autonomous when you're doing that. So I thought that was viciously circular. So my take is emotions are going to be very important for autonomy and for being human. And I think a just society is too, because if you are absorbing values that we would consider to be malformed because of deep injustice, then you're never going to really kind of have an authentic starter set of values that have a process that you can ever clean them. You'll have malformed preferences. All the apples are malformed at the beginning. So I think that, unlike a lot of other bioethicists, autonomy is not the primary value, it's justice. A just society, being in the right community and being nurtured by the right community, enables you to have autonomy later. So maybe being human is being part of the right community or a community. Maybe that's the approach.
I totally agree with that. And I think that our emphasis on autonomy and being human as being that individual that
Right.
gets to stand there and design themselves and pick values, that all emerged in the 50s and the 60s when we were trying to
Mhm.
fight injustice. And we said, no, communities are not fundamentally different. You don't get your moral value because of the color of your skin. We're all equal. We all deserve the same respect. So we all have to be seen as individuals. And the pendulum sort of went in that direction, that being human is being an individual who is autonomous, because we wanted to push justice forward. And as we succeeded in that, we realized, no, we're all embedded in our communities. We can't detach ourselves from our cultural identity. Being human is being a part of a group. We're social beings.
Uh-huh.
And that's such an important part of our humanity. So if society is not built in a way that the community is not just, but can support me,
Uh-huh.
can be there for me, then I can't fulfill my humanity. And I think we're getting there now. It's almost a more evolved understanding of what it means to be human.
Well, and that's I love what you're saying. I think I'm kind of seeing your personal answer to that question. Like I said, the question is almost like a mirror where you reflect
Mm.
back what you care about. So for Vardit Ravitsky, what it means to be human is
Always growing. I loved your story about the Neanderthals stopping at the water and the human figuring out a tool that can get them across the water.
Mhm,
That's a metaphor for how I see my life.
mhm,
You get to an obstacle. You could think of it as a barrier and stop, but God is your witness. You're going to cross, you're going to find a way. And that constant growth to me is captures my humanity and how I see humanity in others. It's that endless potential to change, to grow, to learn, to remain creative, to think differently about things. um, I think that evolutionarily, that is what makes us special. But fundamentally, from a moral perspective, very personally, that's to me the meaning of life is that search of growth and knowing that you can always find a way to get ahead. Um, so to me, that's what it means to be human.
Yeah, for me, this gets back to my critique of the purely rationalistic view. There is a temptation in philosophy, there's a temptation in a lot of disciplines to try to reduce the answer to something very simple or singular. Like, this is the essence, this is the thing that sets A apart from B. And when you do that, when you try to reduce it to just like one or just a very few things that are really unique to this one group, it's what we call kind of the classical set definition of a category. X is X because it has A, B, and C, and only A, B, and C, and that's necessary and sufficient for X being X. The risk with the classical set approach, the essentialist idea is you're always going to find a human being that maybe doesn't have all of that. And you will want to include them into the human community. There's a real risk to kind of narrowing it down too much. As we know, populations are diverse, and in biology, there's kind of a distribution of different properties. And I really kind of like to maybe use that approach for defining what is a human being or what it means to be human. It should probably be a sort of what we call fuzzy sets, right? Many different things that could be included, and they don't always have to be the same thing. But you have just enough of these properties, and there you go. We have enough, and you're a human. We consider you a human being.
We
Um,
invite you to sit with us in the forest
Yeah,
and
exactly.
reflect.
And this is why I love hearing other people's answers because I want to know, like, what do other people have in their fuzzy set, and how much of that's similar to mine, and maybe we haven't even considered other properties that are important that we've just overlooked historically. So I'm all about the fuzzy set. so so I really appreciate your thoughts on this question. It's a really tough question to proposing to the public in the year of being human. What does it mean to be human? And I think the best answer is just the one that comes honestly to you. I want to hear, who are you? What do you believe in?
What you value
Mm,
and how you see that value in others.
exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time, Artie. This is
Thank
fun.
you. Thank you for the partnership.
Sure.